Welcome back. Our focus now turns to a project that is currently underway in London, and that's the Thames Tideway Tunnel, which has been dubbed the Super Sewer and will reduce stormwater overflow and the levels of sewage flowing into the River Thames when it opens in, I think, 2024. I'm joined now by four of the people playing a key role on the project who are going to be talking about the progress so far. So please welcome Rachel Blundell, who's Project Delivery Manager for Tideway with Amy, Robert Smith, Greenwich Tunnel Manager for CVB, Maurice Gallagher, who's Deputy Delivery Manager with Jacobs, and John Corcoran, who's Hammersmith Section Manager for BMB. Great to have you all here. Before we get the discussion underway, we're hoping to take some questions from the audience towards the end of the session, so please make sure you add those into the chat function. Now, let's kick off with each of you telling us what sections the project you're working on in more detail, what stage the work is currently at, and what the key handling challenges are for your work in the next 12 months. Robert, you're top left, so I'm going to pick on you first.
Good morning, everyone. So as Claire's mentioned, my name's Robert Smith. I'm the tunnel manager for the Greenwich Connection Tunnel and also the project manager over at Greenwich. So I'm on Tideway East, so the east section of the Tideway job site. We have we're just in the process at the moment of launching our two machines. The Greenwich machine has got 5 rings in the ground. The main tunnel machine, they've just built their first ring. So we really are in the early stages of tunnelling. Challenges that we've had thus far on the project have been the excavation of the adits, the shotcrete adits to launch the TBMs in, and the grounds that we were tunnelling through, and getting the shotcrete to stick to the wall. The delivery of the tunnel boring machines from the factory in Germany, in particular the Greenwich tunnel machine, and I guess now for everyone this year, COVID has been a big factor in the construction site and support element works, both in terms of office and on site and down in the tunnel. It's been a year of tremendous change and a lot of hard work and resilience from the teams and sort of a dogged determination to persist and get them and to sort of continue the works. And for the next 12 months for us, it will be hopefully full steam ahead tunnelling on both TBMs to complete the respective tunnel drives in early 2022.
Great, lots to look forward to there. Maurice, coming to you next.
Hi, yeah, I'm Maurice Gallagher. I'm employed by Jacobs, and I work for Tideway effectively as the project manager under the contract. My time on Tideway probably predates most people because I was originally seconded into the Thames organisation at the time for the pre-planning for the DCO. They're doing a lot of the construction planning, but then returned to Tideway for the procurement of the main works contracts. And since then, I've been managing the eastern section, same section as Rob, on behalf of Tideway. The eastern section is all works east of Chambers Wharf, and include 5.5 kilometres main tunnel out to Abbey Mills and a 4.5 kilometre drive from Greenwich back to Chambers Wharf, together with the associated shafts. As Rob said, we're just kicking off our tunnelling now, and it's been quite tough to get to this point. Some of the key challenges initially, especially at Chambers Wharf, our site is only 50% on land, so we had to build out into the river. And so that was first site to go out into the river, the big cofferdams, and the learning associated with getting those into the river. Our shafts are deep. The eastern section is the deepest section, so we have large D-wall shafts that go down D-walls 60 to 70 metres, with shafts about 50 to 60 metres deep. Challenges going forward? Well, TBM productivity is yet to be proven. Our machines are designed for the ground conditions, etc., but we have to prove that we can do what we can say. And also secondary lining rates, because post-tunnelling, we move into the secondary lining phase of the project. And both of those elements are critical to the programme going forward. But outside the pure tunnelling, it's the key risk for me is managing the interfaces. There's 3 main works contracts that have to join together with the system integrators contracts, and there's interfaces between all those contracts. We have to make sure they're as efficient as possible. And during the next 18 months, there's numerous connections into live sewers to be undertaken, which puts pressure on the existing system, and all of that work has to be coordinated. And that is complex, confined working in a lot of cases. We spent a lot of work getting into the river. Eventually, we have to get back out of the river and leave a suitable legacy for Tideway and for London. And I think those are the key challenges long term going forward.
So John, coming all the way back up west to you in Hammersmith.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm the site manager here at Hammersmith. We're fairly well on with the works. We've been on site now over 4 years. So Hammersmith's a kind of micro something. It's got a combination of everything, really. We've got to work in live sewer flows. We've got 2 million tons of sewage. We have pumping station here treats. We've got some heavy civil engineering works, underground structures, which we're well on with, really. We were the first site to start shaft sinking, sprayed concrete line on the shaft, and we did a 300-metre connection tunnel in Shotcrete. That was completed a couple of years ago. Again, we were the first site to secondary line. We did that last year, and we lined the shaft as well. So we're coming up out of the ground now with our civils works, and we want to leave the job in the best position that come 2024, when the flows are turned, it's a relatively straightforward job to do. So our main challenge is really now gathering all the bits together, documentation, completing the job. We've got about another 6 months here. We have to hand the site over to a developer, so there's a bit of pressure on us to do that. And the main thing now is that interface with the mechanical and electrical teams, the MICA teams. We've got a lot of pen stocks, systems, pumps, and that's got to be integrated with the existing Thames Water pumping station here at Hammersmith. So there's been a lot of effort already put into that, and we'll continue to do that. It's never as straightforward as I'm sure people are involved with Crossrail. You do the civil engineering side of things, and then there seems to be a big gap, and it's trying to get those two together or as much as possible. So it's a smooth transition between civil engineering, tunnelling, and then into your mechanical and electrical fit out. So that's going to keep me busy. And the other thing I do, I chair the Transformational Health and Safety Group for tunnelling on Tideway. So I know Rob and Morris well. We meet monthly. We have done for the last 5 years, sharing innovations, good practice, challenges across the West, Central and East sections.
So we'll come on to more of that later, I think. But Rachel, coming to you last, because the challenges that John was just outlining there, they fall under your remit, don't they? Your work really follows on from the tunnelling.
Very much so. So we're the systems integration contractor for the whole tunnel. So we work across all 3 sections, interfacing with the MICA teams in each of the main works contractors there. We also interface with Thames Water, because our whole overall SCADA system that's going to be used to control and operate the tunnel actually needs to interface to existing Thames Water systems. They have an existing regional SCADA system that they run out of their main control centre, and we need to make sure that that integrates, but also that it integrates with the lead tunnel, so that it's a whole London Tideway tunnel network. It doesn't just consist of Tideway tunnel and Lead tunnel in isolation. The two need to coexist and then work through to Beckton, where the additional sewage capacity flow has been also being implemented. So yeah, we've been working now for the last 5 years on mainly design work, so making sure that the solution that we're putting together meets the requirements of the tunnel asset. Does it control the flow? Does it monitor the flow? Are we protecting this very expensive tunnel asset so that it does last the 120-year life cycle? We're responsible for making sure signals get off each of the work sites from the control systems at each local work site back to a central system, and then feed that information back down again. So there's cross exchange of data and information between all the different work sites to make sure that it can be controlled as a holistic unit. Also, because the whole purpose of Tideway Tunnel is to avoid the overflows into the river at high rainfall levels. So as we know, rain doesn't just evenly distribute itself across the length of across London. We get isolated heavy showers. So different flows will come in at different places and different rates. So there's a lot of modelling gone into that to work out if it's very high rainfall here, we need to do something different, shut the penstocks earlier, close things down so that the tunnel doesn't become over capacity, and also to avoid what they call the bow wave of the sewer water flow hitting, crashing down at Abbey Mills and flowing all the way back up. Which obviously would damage the actual tunnel asset itself. So yeah, a lot of work's gone into the design phase of our works. We've now come out the other side of our design, thankfully, into the implementation phase, and we're just about to start the formal factory acceptance testing side of our work, working with John's team over in B&B on their first work sites, with factory acceptance due of our integrated panel and control system integration testing in the first part of next year. That will be a key milestone for the project to show that the system does integrate as expected, and then we'll go on to rolling out that into the actual work sites in, say, Q2, Q3 of next year. So that's our big focus, is that integration and factory testing, followed by site installation works.
So it all sounds very simple. So the next 3 years is easy then.
Easy once we get to site.
Great. So I mean, the project's reached the halfway stage, and I think this is a really great time to be looking at the project. Can you tell me what technical lessons have been learned from the earlier stages of tunnelling that are now being shared with the later running contracts? So perhaps the work that's been done on the central section being shared with the east and west.
I don't mind kicking off if you want, as the last people to pick up the tunnelling. I think from the very outset, lessons learned from previous projects was quite a key driving element in the design of the tunnel boring machines and things like launch methodologies. So a lot of lessons were taken from the Lee Tunnel project. A lot of lessons were taken from Crossrail. They were amalgamated into a sort of a key lessons learnt document, which was then given out to the three main work contractors, which drove quite a lot of the more sort of finesse element of the TBM design. So the ergonomics, color coding, sort of safe systems, walkways, etc., refuge chambers. So from the very early outset design concepts, we were integrating already lessons that had been trawled off earlier projects, and then going through then the Tideway sort of life cycle, lessons that had been gleaned from the West and Central projects, in particular for the benefit of East, have been implemented where possible on our tunnel drives. And I know in particular, less probably to do with then the final TBM designs, but then in regards to the launch methodologies, handling of material through the launch phase, there was some nice innovation that the central mainworks contractor Flow have used, with these sort of battery powered little shunting units, which when we went to visit the central mainworks team, we saw them in action. They were a great piece of kit. They made what had been previously a flatbed on an air winch or a locomotive shunting equipment in through the launch phase, turned it into a far safer electric battery powered remote controlled system, which gave for a far safer environment to work in for the TBM launch. So they're sort of like little snippets of, even just down to the small bits of equipment that across the projects we learn. And I think John's monthly tunnel health and safety working group is a fantastic platform for the mainworks contracts to share information. And I think where it's different, and I'll let John talk about it in a bit more detail, but from a mainworks contractor and a tunnel manager's point of view, it's a great forum because it's only the tunnel teams, and we all talk very openly, very frankly, and is a very, I say, air our dirty laundry, but where things haven't worked are almost as important as where things have worked. And there's sort of like a no holds barred expose on what hasn't worked and why it hasn't worked for the learning of others. And I think that is a fundamental point of the working group, which has really benefited Tideway on the wider sections.
So Maurice, coming to you next. Obviously, you're on the eastern section. You've just had the TBMs break into the shaft at Chambers Wharf, haven't you, or virtually?
Yes, yeah. The flow Ferrovial Langeroog TBM, an earth pressure balance machine, broke in just 2 weeks ago, and that was subject to huge collaboration between the two parties there in allowing that reception of that TBM concurrent with CVB, Costain Vinci Baschi, preparing the launch of their main tunnel machine. I don't know if this has happened before, where a 9-meter diameter machine is breaking in to a shaft at the same time as a 9-meter diameter machine is about to break out at the other side of the shaft.
Especially with two different contractors as well.
Two different contractors, and it does take a lot of work to coordinate that. And that work is associated with us building a reception chamber and infilling that reception chamber with a foam concrete to enable the reception of the flow machine, which is under high water pressure, into the machine, and maintaining the safety of the people on the other side of the shaft trying to prepare the TBM. But that was really successfully undertaken there. But it does rely on people willing to talk, resolve issues, and contractual issues can get in the way from time to time, but we're just talking through that. And the way we did that was with an interface control document and agreeing all the steps all the way through about who would do what, who would be principal contractor, etc. But a huge amount of effort by the two parties and by the project manager to try and coordinate it to enable that to happen. It's been fantastic success that over the last 2 weeks, and CVB now are currently still in the preparation. As Rob said, they are building their first and second rings now prior to Christmas, getting ready for a full-scale launch of TBMD in January.
So what lessons have been learned about launching the TBMs and the project from the central section? Is there any advice that you've been given? I guess it's different geology, so perhaps the lessons aren't quite the same.
The lessons aren't quite the same, but both parties, or all three contracts, utilised launch chambers to launch their machines from. So there's a lot of work done initially through John's working group about the sprayed concrete associated with putting launch chambers in the ground. Like I say, our TBMs are similar diameter, but West and Central are both utilising earth pressure balance machines. East is slightly separate because we're down full face in the chalk. We're using slurry tunneling. So the launch methodology is a little bit different. But a lot of work was done initially just in preparing the ground for the reception of those TBMs and also the lowering of those TBMs into the shafts. A lot of lessons have been shared between the two parties, or three parties, because all three built TBMs on the surface and lowered them down into the shaft in one chunk. Minimising sort of the need for assembly underground. Rob's TBM at Greenwich is slightly different, and he may come back to that later, but utilising strand jacking, and the lessons learned across the three parties there has been fantastic.
I suppose that's what differentiates your TBM launch from what was done on the Lee Tunnel, which is probably the most comparable in terms of geology.
Yes, yeah, and the delivery of our main tunnel, so people may have seen that recently, came all the way from a Herrenknecht's factory in Germany, I think 500 kilometers by river in one piece, and landed onto the site and to the pit bottom before it touched the earth.
So John, coming to you, what lessons have you learned from the earlier tunnelling contracts, and what will you be applying or doing differently?
Well, I was the site manager at Lee Tunnel, so that's brought back a lot of memories. One of the biggest things that I wanted to implement, we were the first section to line tunnels here, secondary line with in situ concrete. So I wanted to make sure that we learnt everything from the Lee Tunnel, improved on that, and spent a lot of time talking about that. And it's, I'd say, we lined our tunnel here a year and a half ago. The main tunnels in Tideway are just about to start lining them already. I think Central have already started. So it was taking that learning and analysing it and seeing what needed to change. And then integrating that with the design teams as well, the client, Tideway, and putting a plan together and then implementing it, really. So that's the one thing. And the other one, which is fairly new to me, is working in live sewers. I hadn't done a lot of that. And the Hammersmith catchment area is absolutely huge. And when you get rainfall, I mean, it's a tenth of all the flows that go into Tideway that end up at Beckton. So flow is 25, 30 cube a second. So we had to come up with a way of predicting when these flows were going to arrive at Hammersmith, because we are a pumping station. So in dry weather, we don't get any flows. So those were the two key things for me, really. And also the transformational health and safety group, that sharing of information amongst like-minded professional people who've, you know, been decision makers, are decision makers in the industry 20 or 30 years, and you've got 10 or 12 gathered around the table. You can just get one nugget of information, just might save tens of millions of pounds, just spark someone's idea, or someone saw something on a previous job. And you can latch onto that. And it's surprising, if you make the right decisions, you can save a lot of money, particularly in the early stages of the project.
So we'll come back to how you fostered that collaborative environment in a moment. Just Rachel, I wanted to come to you next. Obviously, you can't learn lessons from the tunnelling work, but did you look to the operation, how the tunnel was put into operation, to actually learn lessons about what you needed to do for Tideway?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lee Tunnel's integration and system commissioning hasn't perhaps gone as smoothly as people had hoped. So there was definitely lessons to be learnt there. I mean, in our delivery team, we're obviously the actual contractor, but in our delivery team, like Morris, we have people from Jacobs that we report into. And one of the people in our team is actually somebody who worked on the Lee Tunnel. So he's very familiar with where things didn't go as well and why they didn't go as well. So I think from the beginning, that's why we've taken as long as we have to get to where we are in terms of design. Everybody was very keen to make sure that all details were covered, all scenarios were considered, and the design actually documented exactly what was going to happen, rather than it being perhaps a little bit open to interpretation or a little bit vague in some areas. Also with Tideway, from the beginning, and I don't think this was quite the same with Lee Tunnel, from the beginning, the systems integration contractor have been involved from the start, and it's been designed for commissioning. So the MICA team and the SI have been working very closely through the MICA working group for the last 5 years, together with the system commissioning steering group, to make sure that as we get to the point of commissioning, the design is suitable for commissioning. So it's always been considered the outcome to drive the design rather than the design driving the outcome. I think that's the main thing that's different.
Okay, great. So we've touched on the fact that there's been a real collaborative environment between the joint ventures working on the project. What is it that's different that's allowed you to do that? Because that doesn't always happen. Has it been the client that's facilitated that, or is it the contractors themselves have come together and wanted to do it? John, I guess you're probably the best place to do it because you've been involved in a lot of that.
Yeah, that was the client that facilitated that. It was their initial thoughts to get this collaboration between West, Central and East. They didn't want 3 silos working independently. So one of the ways they looked to encourage that with the transformational health and safety groups. And it wasn't just tunnelling. I think there's about a dozen. There's a lifting one, there's a cranes one, I think there's a
diaphragm piling.
Yeah, piling, and then river works, river transport, getting sharing amongst all the different groups.
So it's really brought together the best minds across the project to actually problem solve and look at what the issues might be.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it does need the client to steer that group. Well, not steer it, but set it up. I think contractors, otherwise they'll just look at their own little bit of work, and you might do it casually, but not formally. It's kind of formal, but it is it is a bit relaxed as well. It's meant to be an open sharing forum, lessons learned, and not just lessons learned, but what's going well, it's working well, which is really nice to see.
But it's obviously clearly important that the client sets the governance for that to happen, that there's no blame kind of situation, that people feel they can share. Is that true? Yeah,
very much so. And I've certainly felt that encouragement and support from Tideway.
So what have been the best things that have come out of that kind of collaboration? What are the key things for each of you?
I don't know if you could pin it down to one. Sorry, go on.
So Robert was about to say something.
No, I was just about to say, almost probably, John, what you were about to say. I don't think you could say there's been one thing that's come out of the group that stands head and shoulders above the rest. I think that everything's discussed. I mean, we sort of have an agenda every month. There's sort of like one focused topic, but usually the first 20 minutes or so is a general chat about almost what's going well, what's not going well, any lessons learned over the last month, any forward learning. I think one of the sort of aside from the health and safety working group, but it's probably stemmed from it in the beginning, was the precast secondary lining trial, which was an amalgamation between the three Wainworks contractors in the beginning, taking the lessons learned from the Lee Tunnel experience and looking at an alternative. And so the basis of that was sort of health, safety, environmental ergonomics, and as well as program and cost. But that was probably something for me that stood out, that is unique, I would say, to Tideway, where you have three large main works contractors all sort of put their finest minds together and pool knowledge through industry at a worldwide level. I mean, we trawled the world for ideas, and consultants went out and visited projects left, right and centre to sort of come back and try and put together the optimum method of secondary lining.
So Maurice, do you think that collaborative environment that's been created by those groups was really key to Chambers Wharf having one contractor bringing a TBM in, another contractor bringing another TBM out? I mean, Kirtling Street had already done that with two TBMs, but that was under the same contractor. Do you think the collaborative environment was really key to doing that?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think how you collaborate will impact the outcome of a project. I think what we really do well on Tideway, we celebrate what we do well, not just learn the lessons from what we do wrong. We do a lot of reward and recognition, and it's fantastic to see the teams and the pride they show in. We have monthly what we call Right Way in Construction Awards, when every site on Tideway submits little good initiatives that they're doing on their sites that's shared across the whole of Tideway, and each month sites get rewarded for which is considered the best that month. And it is fantastic seeing the pride on people's faces when they get that recognition, and that's sort of backed up by a yearly sort of Right Way award ceremony, and these can be anything, but generally linked to health, safety, welfare, well-being initiatives. But the collaboration, is fundamental. Sort of, we're problem solving, helps build team spirits. Is that shared learning, and it opens up, just as Rob was saying there, further channels of communication. So it's fundamental. For me, I think it's quite easy to get tunnellers to talk. Tunnellers like to talk. You put two tunnellers in a room, and they'll come out with at least three conflicting opinions. But what has been great is that the working groups are not just the tunnelling, like they were saying. There's dozens of working groups for construction related things, but also with design and mica installations and those sorts of things. Like the lessons learned for me, even on the diaphragm walling and piling initially, was fantastic, and the sharing between those piling contractors and taking examples from one to another was fantastic.
Yes, quite a challenge that. So how has the collaborative environment sharing best practice improved health and safety? What improvements have you put in place that other tunnelling projects could learn from?
For me, I could name a couple on the diaphragm walling, a lot of work with the diaphragm walling. There's very large rebar cages, 12 meters in length, being delivered to site, and they all have to be coupled. A huge amount of work was done on how that coupling would be done to minimize hands in the cages, etc. One contractor, and it was a CVB, developed edge protection around the panels, because these are big, deep trenches full of slurry, 60 meters deep. That edge protection was handed over effectively to another contractor, and they implemented the same. The other contractor developed aluminium hoppers on the top of the panels that CVB then benefited from. So there's a myriad of benefits like that. Additionally, on the river, on Tideway, we're putting more freight on the river than has ever been done before, I think. And the learning between the marine contractors and the shared learning there has been fantastic. And it's even to the stage where just how you tie up a barge and how you moor it to your cofferdam and how the rope should be tied has all now been defined, which wasn't previous. And it's something that as tunnelers, it wouldn't naturally occur to us, but it's fantastic to see those benefits as well.
John, is there anything you'd like to bring out on the health and safety side of things that have really surprised you or been real step forwards?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been contracting, and on previous jobs, if you have an incident or anything like that, the client tends to think his role is to give you a kicking. And why did that happen? And why did this? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you think of this? And you feel guilty. And that tends to spread then amongst the team when they see the site managers going around expecting the next kicking. Tideway, totally the opposite. Very, very supportive and encouraging good practice, encouraging you, promoting good practice, making you feel good about safety, encouraging inspections, encouraging people to come to site. The guys now where I am, they love it when someone does an inspection. Have a look, come and see what we're doing. And it just creates that feel-good factor. It makes safety enjoyable, not like, oh, he's a safety officer, it's come on in. And I think Tideway have done a lot to promote that, because we have had incidents, but you felt supported rather than put down. And that's the biggest difference I've noticed, without a doubt, on Tideway. And they have a very good structure for handling incidents and what level investigation to go into. There's a time scale on when you have to get your reports out if something's happened or you learned something, initial 24-hour, and then it's a 7-day learning. All laid out, you know what to expect, you know how to manage it. And I think it's for me, as a site manager, it's a lot more pleasurable to work that way.
So it's really changed the mindset and the culture on site as well. So I think Robert touched on earlier talking about coronavirus. Like many projects, Tideway shut down except for safety critical work in the first coronavirus lockdown. What were the challenges of getting work restarted, and is that still having implications on site?
Well, I can talk for Hammersmith, and the biggest issue we had was the shared welfare areas and transport to site using public transport. So we've taken over more offices now, got more welfare, so we can maintain 2-meter distancing in where the canteens are and where the changing rooms are. And we've given the guys options to drive as well, rather than public transport. So for the actual works on site, it's easier because you're in open air, it's easier to manage that.
Robert, you mentioned coronavirus earlier, so I'll come to you next.
Yeah, so similar to John, welfare and travel to and from site was the sort of the main focus. Second was we have a number, more than a handful, I would say, of specialists in their field who travel from overseas. We've got a tunnel boring machine which is supplied by a German manufacturer, Herring Connect. They provide a team for the assembly and getting the machine ready to launch. So they're coming in from Germany. They also have workforce from other countries in Europe and further afield. We've got quite a lot of specialist equipment on site with service personnel from further afield. So they're then a worldwide sort of support network. And that's where you deal with the first problem, which is the welfare, getting the guys back on site, sufficient space for changing, handovers of shifts, staggering shifts, so that you don't have a mass group all turn up at the welfare all at the same time. But then for the operation of site and that support structure, it's not a case anymore of sort of just pick up the phone and somebody jumps on a plane and they're with you tomorrow. You've then got to consider quarantine periods, accommodation when they're here, testing, where they can get their tests taken. There's sort of another whole level that then also needs to be taken into account. And as it happens at the moment, the Greenwich site is currently shut down. We had a pocket of positive cases identified at the weekend just gone from some of these fly-in, fly-out workers who are travelling in from overseas, who test through the airport every time they travel, and they had a positive test come back. We then did a selection of testing for people who've worked around them, and a couple of those have come back positive. So we're now testing everyone on site, and just shut the site down for a couple of days as just sort of okay, we'll stop work, we'll thoroughly clean the site from top to bottom, disinfect everywhere, get mass testing rolled out. So there's 150 tests have gone away with the site personnel teams, to give both us as the management team, but also for the guys on site, the guys and girls. It gives them a bit of reassurance as well. Obviously their welfare is paramount to the project. So that's sort of our first port of call, make sure that they're all safe and well looked after. And we're also using proximity watches. So using what was previously used for monitoring hand-arm vibration syndrome. They're a watch that gets worn by a user, and they talk by Bluetooth to a tool. As one of the sort of protective mechanisms of restarting work on site, the supplier of this watch was able to harness its Bluetooth sort of technology so that it could then talk watch to watch. And so everybody who now comes to site wears one of these watches. They're registered to your ID card. And in the event then that somebody tests positive, we can then quickly see who they've been in contact with and for what period of time they've been in contact with in sort of 2 meters or less proximity. And it allows us to isolate people faster or prove that they've not actually been in long contact with anybody, and safe to continue. So that's been a really helpful tool, bit of technology for the East teams.
Which I guess is essential for people working in the tunnel environment, because it must be very difficult to do social distancing in that kind of limited space. Maurice, have you got any experience on that?
No, in East, it's going to be a learning curve as we go forward now. Like Rob said, we've just had this outbreak on Greenwich. But what Rob has additionally had to implement is on our TBMs themselves, different areas. He's had to zone that for different requirements to protect individuals against transmitting the virus. And we've got to see the benefits of that going forward. But it is an enclosed space. The risks are there. And I think long term, the success of the vaccine may be fundamental to how well we can tunnel unhindered, because we've been assembling tunneling machines now for the last 3 or 4 months without issue. We've just literally launched the machine and the gang have gone down with the virus, and this hits us. And we try to protect by having additional resources, standby resources on call, but when everyone goes down, I think, Rob, there's 4 TBM pilots or potential TBM pilots are affected, which doesn't leave us resource to mobilize easily from elsewhere, particularly this close to Christmas.
And also a TBM is not something you can just stop, is it? You've got to keep it moving
as best as possible. Yeah. One of the things from the just going quickly back to the working group, one of the things we touched on, it must have been now in 2019, was VR. And how we can utilize VR technology, virtual reality technology, to visit a tunnel boring machine without necessarily going there. And it was sort of it's been run. I know that the West and Central contractors are probably slightly further advanced in this than East. But we're now utilizing that to provide that sort of 3D immersive environment in the event that we need to do some work on the machine, a breakdown, a repair, whereby you would otherwise have a specialist come in. We can now don a headset, they can sort of immerse themselves in a VR world, and through this sort of VR space, we can work remotely on the machine. So that's helping us in quite now with the this was all pre-COVID, but now with the whole coronavirus thing, this is now advantageous to us, and it's allowing us to have that little bit more remote capacity.
Yeah, it's certainly accelerating innovation. Rachel,
Yeah.
has coronavirus impacted your work at all?
You wouldn't think it would, really, would you? Because we're mainly working in an office environment. So initially, we obviously all have been working from home, but the thing that has impacted us is the fact that we need to build our test rig environments. And for factory acceptance, there's also, you go to the panel manufacturers, and there's a number of different people who need to be in attendance. But because of the restrictions around social distancing, that does limit the number of people that can go. So what we've been working on is different ways to undertake factory acceptance testing remotely. We have had some success, quite a bit of success, with actually utilising Teams to enable Thames Water and Tideway to witness testing remotely by looking at screens over Teams and things like that. And it is working quite well, although it takes longer than it would have done if you'd been physically in the room. So things, and also because it's harder to concentrate over Teams, we've had to break it down into much smaller chunks over a more long period of time. So we have been impacted by it, and it has impacted our programme of delivery this year and continues to impact it. So we're not immune to it, despite not working in the site environment with a number of people together.
Thank you. Rob, I do hope your team recovers quickly from that and there are no sort of complications for them.
Thank you.
So just moving on to some questions from the audience. One of the delegates has asked, is there anything the different sections have disagreed on when it comes to tunnelling, for example, techniques used or systems employed?
Well, I think the main tunnel secondary lining, the west section went with in situ fairly early on. Central and east stayed with precast for quite a long time. So there's one example.
Maurice, do anything come to mind?
On the tunnelling, I can't think of anything specifically. The east tunnels were always thought to be suitable for slurry tunnelling and west and central earth pressure balance, and when the contractors tendered, they came up with the same opinion. Like John said, on the secondary lining, there's different designs or philosophies about the formwork associated with the secondary lining. The formwork in the west contract is very similar to the formwork that will be implemented in east. The central section has a slightly different philosophy there. Like I say, it's early days on secondary linings, so the success or failure of one or the other is yet to be proven. But nothing jumps out at me as like conflicting by any of the parties.
Robert, anything from your side?
No.
No, you all agree?
Yeah.
That's great. Is there any key lessons you think that other tunnelling projects around the world could learn from Tideway to take forward?
I can give some for TBM delivery. So the philosophy of the Tideway scheme was to deliver or to lower the TBMs, the tunnel boring machines, into the shafts as a whole unit to prevent the need to reassemble in the pit bottom. This reduces the amount of heavy lifting that needs to be done in a shaft. Obviously, the pit bottom is a pretty small space in the grand scheme of things, and when you're lowering down 80-ton plus components, you don't really want people down there. So a good sort of driving philosophy of Tideway was the full TBM shield will be assembled. Unfortunately, for the Greenwich TBM, we were hit by two obstacles. The first was we're one of the a few inland sites of Tideway, so we're not river fronted. And so to deliver the TBM shield, it needed to be transported by road. So we spent quite a long time with the TBM shield on the back of these self-propelled modular transporters, these sort of multi-axled self-propelled units. And sort of as we got closer and closer to the move, more and more concerns were being raised by third-party utility companies that wanted various different bits of design analysis to be done, and we got into a realm of sort of unpaved work. Really, it was all sort of everything was being put together live in front of us in terms of what sort of design assessments would be undertaken and various different things. So that snagged things up. And then unfortunately, the coronavirus shutdown sort of drove then us needing to then split the TBM shield down and bring it in slightly more conventionally in smaller pieces. So it's the transport of heavy items by road in London, and probably in all cities of a certain age. When you're talking about water and gas mains which are 100+ years old, made out of cast iron pipes, there are so many uncertainties that really, when you get outside the realms of normal road traffic, it becomes a very grey area. So sort of a good lesson learned going forwards for future tunnelling in London, and also within other cities.
Maurice, have
be
you got
mindful of the sides.
Maurice, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple for me might be, well, in the eastern section, and it was mandated at DCO times that the shafts were all online to the main tunnel. And the reason for that, there's certain parties had a fear around doing open face tunneling in the chalk, high water pressures, etc. But what that does bring in parts of the program is it makes the shaft and the tunnel critical. So if one is delayed, it has the potential to delay the other. I would say we don't need to make the shafts and tunnels coincident. We can connect with connection tunnels, as we've proven on this job. So that's one thing that delinks the criticality of the program. Another thing I often think about is that it's urban tunneling. We are trying to go 24/7 where we can. In an urban environment, there's all those environmental impacts, and we've mandated the use of noise enclosures over the tunneling sites. I would suggest when we design the noise enclosures, let's not just minimize them just for the cost of the noise enclosure itself. Think about the bigger picture and the ongoing works, because if that enclosure enables 24-hour working, there are other elements of the work rather than just the core tunneling that may benefit from that. So really think early days about all of the activities throughout the program. And I think in the DCO itself, from early days, there's not much flexibility, or it's very difficult to vary from what is agreed at planning. That's with spatial areas, you utilize their methodologies. So embedding some flexibility in the planning process would assist.
Okay, just had another question come in from our audience asking, how has the tidal behaviour of the Thames impacted construction? So I guess, Maurice, that's probably perhaps comes back to you. Chambers Wharf is perhaps the key one there.
Yeah, the tidal impact, that was one of the delays that we suffered at Chambers Wharf initially. Because I think at Chambers Wharf we've got maybe a 5 metre tidal range, 5 or 6 metres, something like that. And I know when we were starting off the project, there was numerous cofferdams having to go into the river, and there was limited resources to pull on. We brought all the experience in we could. But one thing that caught us out was just with that tidal range, as we were constructing our cofferdam, how much silt the Thames carries in and out. So every morning when we were coming back in to do our a bit more piling on our cofferdam, the cofferdam was just full again from what we had excavated the previous day. So there is a huge amount of learning to be done on that. But then it's also in the design of those cofferdams, utilizing that tidal range to make sure that your cofferdam is big enough so subsequent operations that are serviced by the cofferdam can maximize the high tides, etc., and designing your cofferdam such that you don't have low water necessarily during the day.
So just briefly, has the tidal range of the Thames affected any of the tunnelling work?
So our storing machines, they have a Samson air regulating unit which controls the face pressure, and into that we link into the tides, and so it accounts for tidal range, because there's about a half a bar of pressure difference between a low tide and a high tide, with the 5 to 6 meters ebb and flow of the tide. So it's accounted for automatically by the PLC on the TBM.
John, what about you? Have you had any issues with tidal?
No, not here, because Hammersmith's not on the river there. But in the past, when we were at Lee, it affects getting your materials in and out, particularly spoil. So if you're tidally restricted, you can only load so much on your barges, and same when you're depositing them as well. So
So you
it can
need to
become,
program your work around that.
yeah, yeah. And
What
it can be-
about you, Rachel? Just briefly, does it affect your work at all with the
No.
tidal? So it's more down to the heavy rainfall and that side of things rather than the tide.
Yes, there's no impact at all by the tide, because we don't
Okay.
do anything on the river.
Brilliant.
The-
I was going to say, sorry,
potential impact. Sorry.
it's just about all we have time for now, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for that, Maurice, and thank you all for joining us today. There's been some really good insight into the project and the progress and the achievements so far on Tideway. I've certainly enjoyed following the development of the project right from the start with the construction of the Lee Tunnel almost 10 years ago now. And it sounds like your hard work means the project is on the right track for successful completion, although I imagine there are plenty of challenges to come in the next 3 years. Our next session is a fireside chat with Arup Director Alison Norrish, and I'll be back with you shortly to